slew. Just kidding. Kind of. Hi, guys. We are back live for an actual live stream for the first time in a hot minute. Your girl has been running all over the globe the last couple of months, had some ongoing health things. I got married, so crazy, but we are officially back for the regular stream at our normal time all of the days, and I could not be more excited to be spending our afternoons together again. I am clearly not. I am in my parents' basement at the moment, which by no one tells you how weird it is back after you're married. Like, am I still the same person? This is such a bizarre experience. But I am back here because I am speaking at an amazing Christian summer camp organization called Summit Ministries here in the beautiful of Colorado. So came a couple days early to hang out with my mom and dad and enjoy the fall, almost fall-ish weather and escape some of the Miami crazy. Apparently our audio may not be working. You guys, hang on. We'll fix it. 1 second. All right, we'll just unplug the fancy microphone because it's deciding to be silly today. So sorry about that. Anyway, hence, if our system is not working quite as well, it's because we are in the boonies in my parents' basement, not in our normal setup, and that is a-okay. I'll just sound a little bit echoey today for the stream, which is absolutely no problem whatsoever. Today is also a very, very exciting day for everyone over on our Instagram community because, drum roll please, we have officially hit 1 million of you in this community as of this morning. And my brain honestly can't really center around the fact that there are more than 1 million of you here now. Thank you for being here. Thank you for following along, for amplifying voices and stories that don't often get a chance to be heard in our world. It is like honestly crazy. I'm going to try really hard not to get emotional. It is honestly crazy looking back over the past 5 years or so when I decided to start posting on social media. I told my parents here in this house on our couch in our living room that I didn't want to go to medical school. When I finished college, I wanted to post things on social media that made a difference in the world. And my parents laughed their butts off because they said, okay, this is so unbelievably bizarre, but sure, as long as you can figure out a way to pay for it, we will always be supportive of you. And here we are just a couple of years later, less than 5 years later, and it's been the journey of a lifetime. I could never have imagined the opportunities that we would have had, the relationships that we made along the way, the impact that we've been able to have. It is mind-blowingly cool, and I am so incredibly grateful for each and every one of you being here for the journey. So to all 1 million of you, I absolutely love you, and I'm so glad that we are back for the stream. Okay, all of that to be said, we've got a lot to talk about today because there's a lot going on in the world this week. So without further ado, let's jump right in. First things first, there's a lot going on with news coming out of the Middle East, in Afghanistan specifically, and the Taliban as the governing body, government, because that's sadly where we've been for the last few years of Afghanistan, in massively eradicating women's voices and women's rights. And when I say women's voices, I mean quite literally, largely because of news that's been emerging over the past couple of days throughout the weekend. And I already made a TikTok video about this and an Instagram reel about this. And there's a lot of confusion as to what this means. There's a lot of people claiming this is somehow westernized propaganda. It's not, but I would be remiss if we didn't begin the stream today by talking about this massively underreported story. Not because the media isn't covering it, because shockingly they are, and they're covering it with journalistic integrity, I think, but because so many people are either A, refusing to believe that it's real, or B, trying to suggest that because it's happening on the other side of the world, it somehow doesn't matter and doesn't pertain to our day-to-day life and doesn't impact Americans, so why should we care? As always, in any of these live streams, if you guys agree with what I'm saying, if you disagree with what I'm saying, if you have questions about what I'm saying, dump it in the live chat so that we can have an open discussion about this. But I just want to say up front, even in our incredibly divided community, even in a world that seems dominated by political polarization, even in a world where if it's not happening in your own backyard, somehow it doesn't pertain to your very narrow, blinded worldview, human rights matter because human beings matter. The only reason that we should be caring so much about the policies that we advocate for, or the people that we vote for, or the countries that we're moving to or fleeing from, is because the policies practiced by those people, the policies practiced by those governments, require adherence to human rights simply because you are governing people. And all people are made in the image of God. All people are worthy of dignity and respect and love. And I'm honestly really frustrated to see how this story is being received by the Western world, not because nobody's talking about it, but because everyone's trying to suggest that because they're not American citizens, we shouldn't care. Because it's on the other side of the globe, we shouldn't care. Or because we need to somehow care about our problems in exclusion or isolation from everyone else. If you guys didn't already know what happened over the weekend, just sit down and buckle up because this is a big one. It's a big doozy. But basically, to give you the 30,000-foot overview, a couple of days ago, the Taliban, who is the governing authority of the nation of Afghanistan, ever since the United States engaged in its absolutely atrocious, I'm like combining 8 words, atrocious, chaotic, and arguably catastrophic withdrawal of Afghanistan a few years ago, which, by the way, happened 3 years ago today, which is crazy to think about that all of this is emerging in the news so on the mark with the calendar. So the Taliban is governing Afghanistan. And over the last few years, we've seen a massive decline in progress that actually had existed in recent years for actual gender equality and women's rights in the country, because they were trying to institute a more strict interpretation of Islamic law, and what many Islamic scholars are actually arguing falls outside the purview of religious law entirely and goes into complete fanaticism, not remotely based in Islam as a religion. But just recently, over the weekend, they took the most dramatic step towards complete totalitarianism, beyond what they were already practicing, that anybody could have ever projected, ideated, or guessed would have happened in the future. And that is creating a 114-page document called the Vice and Virtue Laws, not even making this up, governed by the Vice and Virtue Ministry of the Taliban. Yeah, the Vice and Virtue Ministry. And I promise I'm not making any of this up. The Associated Press talks about this in all of their findings, and they were the ones to initially break this story because the 114-page document was originally shown to them. These Vice and Virtue laws are creating a distressing vision for Afghanistan's future, as according to Amnesty International, international human rights organizations, and Western countries, because they are specifically trying to create intolerable restrictions on personal behavior that the Taliban gets to deem to either be a vice or be a virtue. And this ministry, which, let's be honest, has nothing to do with actual morality in society, is taking it upon themselves to govern personal behavior, not just societal standards, not just laws, but what someone can do in their own house, what someone can do in their own relationships and families, and the degree to which women are even allowed to participate in society at large. You've probably seen some posts about this already because the new rulings in this 114-page document are so insane that they are all over social media, including that women have to cover their entire bodies, including their faces. And you may have seen a really distressing image that's actually the thumbnail to this video, and I shared it on Instagram as well, that looks like something out of Dune. I mean, it literally looks like the Bene Gesserit witch people, where they're like completely covered. It's out of a sci-fi movie, truly. All wearing black, and you can't even show any part of your face, because it is up to women now to prevent any sort of temptation of men by looking at a woman in public. Women are no longer under law allowed to make eye contact or look at men who are not directly related to them by blood or by marriage. Women are not allowed to go to public parks. Women are not allowed to leave their homes without the accompaniment of a male relative, and that includes widows, by the way. Women are certainly not entitled to the same educational rights that they have been for the last several years. But perhaps most disgustingly, something that I honestly get nauseous thinking about every single time, and I genuinely cannot believe the world is not in outcry over, is this new law. that women using their voices in public, women daring to utter a sound in public, is now banned, is now illegal. If you open your mouth and your vocal cords produce a sound as a woman, you will face imprisonment, you will face torture, and you may even face worse, because the government has deemed it to be so. This is easily the most extreme restriction on actual women's rights I've ever encountered in my lifetime. And is quite literally the definition of regressing a society, but we'll get back to that. But quite literally, women are no longer allowed to make noise in public in Afghanistan nationwide because of the Taliban. The Times reported this on Friday, that women have been banned from speaking in public, but it also includes more than just speaking under these new draconian laws announced by the Taliban. The rules, which also stop women from showing their uncovered faces in public, were approved by the country's supreme leader and represent the most strict measures imposed on women since the Taliban regained power today, 3 years ago today. It's also the first formal declaration of laws by the Ministry for the Propagation of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice, which literally sounds like something out of a George Orwell dystopian fiction novel, right? I just have to read that again. The Ministry for the Propagation of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice. This is their first ever decree of laws, and I'm sure it will not be the last, composing 35 different articles, Article 13 largely centering around women, over 114 pages. It's specifically attempting to regulate personal conduct, and in Article 13, specifically honing in on women, the most atrocious things you've ever heard are now law. It is mandatory, as I said, for a woman to veil her body at all times in public and wear a face covering, which is essential to avoid temptation and tempting others. Women are now compelled to cover themselves fully in front of non-Muslims to avoid being corrupted. And most atrociously, a woman's voice is now under law deemed intimate, and so should not be heard ever singing, reciting, or reading aloud in public. The law says that a woman's voice is considered private and should never be heard by other people. Riley Gaines, dear friend of mine, wonderful young woman, one of the greatest voices for women's rights, I believe, in the Western world, tweeted this morning something that I cannot get out of my head, and it just keeps bouncing around over and over and over again. She said, as of this morning, dogs, quite literally, have more rights under Afghan law than women. Because if a dog barks in public, a dog is not going to be tortured or worse. But if a woman makes a sound using her vocal cords in public today, she will. I'm honestly just stunned. I'm completely stunned about the response that I'm seeing from the West. And to their credit, now that I've done a little bit more digging, a lot of feminists are speaking up to talk about this. Not enough. So the first thing I'll say is, feminists, where the hell are you? Because we need a whole lot more voices to literally speak up for those that are prohibited from speaking up at all about their situation. But for those that aren't speaking up, I'm seeing an alarming justification of this type of policy because it's just a different culture. It's just a different culture. You can't judge another country's culture. How dare the watchdog police state United States claim that we should be changing the way that other countries govern their policy and their citizens. To put all of that at ease for you, there is nothing about this that is inherently tied to United States values and policies. Maybe it should be, other than the fact perhaps that our disastrous withdrawal of Afghanistan 3 years ago today probably led to all of this. So thanks, Biden and Harris. but in no way is being outspoken about this atrocious attack on human rights. Somehow the United States wanting to take their big, evil, oppressive thumb and squash all the other countries on the planet underneath of it. This is about basic human rights. And yet, because we can't even define very important objective terms in society, I don't think we have a universal definition of basic human rights anymore. Instead, I've watched dozens upon dozens upon dozens of people in my comment sections today over this video try to somehow justify this under multiple different excuses. Number one, we really shouldn't care because those women don't live in America, so they're not really our problem and we should be paying attention to our country first. Wrong. We should care because they are a human being. And no human being should be silenced, literally, and locked in their home. Number two, well, we really can't judge them because it's a different country and it's a different culture and that's just different from us, but that doesn't necessarily make it bad because there is no such thing as objective good or objective bad. No, it is objectively bad. It is objectively bad to literally take away the voice of an entire half of your society, refuse to provide adequate education, refuse to allow them to participate in the employment sector of your country, refuse to allow them to leave their house, that's called detention of someone against their will, refuse to allow them to show any part of their body in public, that is wrong. And the fact that our country and our culture can't point to that and identify it as wrong just goes to show me how far we've allowed progressivism to go simply for progress, for the sake of progress. To say that we've changed, even if that change wasn't actually yielding positive benefits for society. If, in fact, that progress was actually regress, just for the sake of shaking things up. Or, number three, that this is actually good for society. This is good because they have stronger rule of law than we do. They know how to silence women better than we do, and women are just crazy in the United States of America. Maybe we should take a page out of that playbook. Also, wrong. I've seen a lot of comparisons about this policy draft that is now law over the last couple of days, and even how things existed in Afghanistan over the past several decades, but also largely with Judeo-Christian values that built Western civilization. And it's fascinating to think about how different cultures are approaching the role of womanhood. Certainly, women are different from men. I think any sane individual, any individual rooted in goodness and morality and truth would tell you, obviously, men and women are different and they have different roles and we occupy different spaces, and that's important to continue protecting and identifying. But different doesn't mean shut away from the world. Different doesn't mean less than. Different doesn't mean subject to, property of, subordinate to. Women were created by God with a purpose, to be set apart, to be a voice of intuition for society when we desperately need it. And let's be honest, our world is literally on the brink of World War III. I think our world could use a lot more intuition. Women's empathy and emotional communication strengths are desperately needed in the family unit, all over these governance structures in the Western world and everywhere else, in faith spaces and more. Women were never created by God to be shut away, to be imprisoned from the rest of the world, to be completely cloistered, both body and voice, from everyone around them. And it's not bigoted, it's not discriminatory, it's not evil to say that. There is nothing xenophobic about that worldview. There is everything humanitarian about that worldview. And I said something on a live stream or a video a few days ago that I think really applies here. In our quest to rid society of discrimination, which is a good thing, over the past several decades in the United States and in the West, we've successfully, in many ways, we're not there yet always, but in many ways, ended discrimination against people. Because that is bad. Discriminating against someone because of who they are as a person is bad. But in the process, we've overcorrected for the wrongdoings and evil of society in times past so substantially that we've lost the ability, we've lost the gift, we've lost the discernment to discriminate between ideas, to discriminate between values, to discriminate between lifestyles and cultures. It is okay to say that way of life is wrong. It is okay to say that treatment of another human being is wrong. It is okay to be able to discriminate between good and evil. But the more I post about stuff like this, a couple of weeks ago, it was Iraq trying to change the marriage law of women to 9 years old. Today, it happens to be literally muzzling and silencing women in any public space in Afghanistan. And if you think it just stops at them telling women they're not allowed to talk, think again. I think we will have a whole Hunger Games AVOX situation on our hands very, very quickly. Our inability to call that out as evil, as wrong, as anti-humanitarian, speaks volumes to me over how broken our culture has become. And it has never been more important than today to speak up literally for those who have lost the ability to speak up for themselves, because they are rapidly losing the opportunity to do so. And we quickly will be losing the opportunity to do exactly the same thing, because this is not staying isolated to Afghanistan. You might think it will, but it's not. And sadly, I think half of our population today would probably applaud it becoming integrated with our own society too. Women deserve so much better. And most importantly, they deserve our courage. They deserve our bravery in being willing to stand up and do the hard thing, because it is hard, to say this is wrong. And it's time for us to do something about it. And just to put any fears at rest that you guys think this might be somehow propaganda or anything, again, the Associated Press, AP News, broke this to begin with. The Taliban actually showed them the 114-page, 35-article document with all of these rules for the Ministry of Vice and Virtue. They ended up sharing that with other news organizations. So CNN is reporting on this today. The Telegraph's reporting on this. Fox News, obviously. The Times, which we just reacted to. So there is abundant media evidence that this is in fact happening. It's not just somehow westernized propaganda. Sadly, I think most westernized media would probably try to make excuses for this or justify it. But the most important way that we can continue to speak out is simply by using our voices where they matter the most, and that is right here on social media. So share stories about this to your Instagram story, retweet things if you're seeing stuff about this on Twitter, repost things on TikTok, make your own videos about it, because women everywhere are waiting. They're crying out desperately for us to say something when we have the privilege to do so. Sadly, women are not necessarily on the best trajectory in the West either right now, so I want to switch gears to a little bit of a different story to share with you guys, because I read this statistic and genuinely I am just baffled by it. We'll jump into this next story and react to some of your comments here for just a second. That 45%, for almost half, 45% of adult women in America are expected to be single and childless by the year 2030. We're coming to that in just a second, but first want to react to some of your comments about all of the things that we just talked about with the laws in Afghanistan. Thank you, Will, for your donation in our super chat over on YouTube. You are the best. And I'm really curious to see what you guys have to say about this. Amy says these women are still humans and they desperately deserve our ability to speak up. Amen, Amy. So well said. I'm scrolling. This is fascinating. A lot of you guys are trying to say that this is a good thing, but I think it's okay for you to say multiple things can be true at the same time. It can be wrong how women are being treated, behaving, etc. in the West right now, which I agree, but it can also be wrong what the Taliban is doing to women. Let's Get Randy says on Rumble, maybe the Taliban took a look at what happened to Western society when women got too much equality and decided they needed to make sure that that didn't happen to them. I see a lot of those comments, but let's remind ourselves that this is separate from politics. This is basic human rights. And while American women are being encouraged by the powers that be and the people who pull the puppet strings to scream to the rooftops that their rights are being taken away, their supposed right to end the life of their child, for example, actual human rights, actual women's rights, actual women's equality is being yanked out from those who desperately need it the most in countries like Afghanistan. Let's go jump over to locals and see what you guys have to say. Sabina says the other side of the world deserves our attention. That's beautifully, very simply said. I absolutely love that. Crazy stuff, crazy stuff. As we're jumping into this next story, I want to give a huge shout out to our amazing sponsor of today's stream, our friends over at Public Square. If you guys aren't using Public Square already, I have no idea what the heck you are doing with your lives. But if you are looking for businesses to support that share your values and stop shopping at places like Amazon and Target, you can check out their lineup of more than 100,000 small businesses, all of which are pro-faith, pro-family, and pro-freedom at publicsquare.com. You guys are the best. We absolutely love you. Okay, so jumping over to our side of the world, as I mentioned, women in America are going in a very weird trajectory, and I am dying to get your guys' feedback about this because I genuinely have no idea where we go from here as a society or how this is even possible. A new study released some data last week predicting that 45%, nearly half of women aged 25 to 44 in America are expected to be single and childless by the year 2030. We're talking 5 years from now, 5 years and some change, which is a really scary thought. This is not normal for any society. It's literally not healthy for a society because we quite literally cannot replace our existing population if half of women are in fact single and childless. But I digress. And Evie Magazine did a really interesting write-up about this. I love Evie, for the record. If you guys are not reading this already and you are a young woman, this is 1000% something that you need to be following on social media or on their website. We love Evie. They're incredible. But they had some interesting points written by my friend Gina Florio, who's absolutely amazing, that I wanted to share with you about this idea. Gina says, we are told by our culture that a woman who is unmarried and has no children is empowered and in charge of her own life. She has escaped the unnecessary burden of raising a family and being a slave to her husband. Do we remember everything that just came out the other day about the ballerina farm article? That's exactly how Western culture wants to portray marriage and motherhood, which, by the way, in case you're not caught up, was in fact all a scam. Hannah Neeleman has come forward to say this was a direct attack on her family. It was premeditated. Everything was taken out of context. Absolutely crazy stuff. But that is how they portray this, that women who get married are slaves to their husbands. And if you, by some horrible stroke of bad luck, end up getting pregnant, you will be riddled with an unnecessary burden of raising a family for your entire life. At least, Gina writes, that's what our society has convinced us. And because of this incredibly powerful lie that's being propagandized to several generations at a time, many women have adopted the modern feminist lifestyle and have chosen to sleep around, abort their baby if they get unexpectedly pregnant, and swear off marriage forever. Because of all of this, Morgan Stanley has created a new data set that came out last week, estimating that 45%, nearly half, of American women in their prime working years, age 25 to 44, are expected to be single and childless by the time 2030 arrives. Yikes. First of all, I mean, that is truly a terrifying thought. Because we already can't replace our current population. We did a stream not too long ago about rapidly plummeting fertility rates all over the developed world and how basically every single Western country is massively struggling to replace their own population. We are not, in fact, overpopulated the way your college professor trying to preach to you about climate change is trying to get you to believe. But also, how sad. How profoundly meaningless, how depressing. And that's not to say that your life is meaningless if you are single and childless. Everyone has a different vocation. But having been married for 2 months and watching all of my friends around me over the last few years be married and start to get pregnant and have children, the joy that is so tangible in my community is unmatched by anything I've ever experienced. Like, we are quite literally selling a lie. selling propaganda to women, trying to gaslight them into believing they will be happier alone. They will be more empowered if a man never commits to them. They will have more purpose in their life if they have no one to go home to after their 100-hour-a-week job. What a sad, shallow template for existence, honestly. I find it really telling that Morgan Stanley published this study, because clearly this has everything to do with trying to convince women that their lives are going to be so much more profoundly better if they spend their entire existence working for their woke corporate CEO in San Francisco or New York, who would rather pay for them to just have an abortion out of state than, I don't know, give them better maternity leave policies and a better work-life balance. But Morgan Stanley decided to push this out several years ago, and it's just now starting to make the rounds with updated data this week. Back in 2019, so 5 years ago, Morgan Stanley then published an article that outlined women's impact on the American economy, noting that the number of prime working-aged women, aged 25 to 44 in the United States, has been steadily increasing over the past several decades. And most of these prime working age women are single and completely focused on their career. Zero desire to get married, zero desire to start a family. These women, they said 5 years ago, would only continue to have greater representation in the workforce, allowing companies to boost wages and positively impact the American economy. But it looks like there will be fewer and fewer mothers now over the next couple of decades, which was different from their projections in 2019, 5 years ago. Instead, women are choosing to commit themselves solely to work rather than start a family, which honestly, if you look around at all of the propaganda from every celebrity and influencer and political organization, and I don't know, candidate for president of the United States, can you really be shocked and amazed that women aren't wanting to have children? We quite literally tell Generation Z women and millennials too, the worst possible thing that could ever happen to you is if you get pregnant. So don't worry. At the DNC, we'll just provide you free abortions. At your college, Planned Parenthood will be allowed to stand out on your campus and give you resources on how you can walk 2 blocks away, because the vast majority of Planned Parenthood surgical abortion centers are within walking distance to a college campus. Heck, we'll even have Planned Parenthood write the vast majority of sex ed classes for the public education system in America, which they do. So we've created a culture of petrifying fear around being pregnant and having children that you quite literally think, I will die if I have a baby. I will die in childbirth probably if I have a baby. I absolutely must prevent this from happening at all costs. So it's not shocking women are choosing to have less children to begin with. But get this part blows my mind. The number of single women in the United States is expected to increase by 1.2% every year from 2018 to 2030. 1.2% compared to a 0.8% increase for the overall population. This is likely going to result in a 45% gap of women, group of women, between the ages of 25 and 44 who will be single and childless by 2030. Nearly half of adult-age women, who also just happen to be, according to Morgan Stanley, in their prime working years to contribute to the American economy. But what the media will never tell you, what politicians will never tell you, what influencers and celebrities will never tell you, is that despite being packaged in this beautiful, shiny, glittery bow of feminism and progress and empowerment and putting yourself first, girl, the negative impact this has for our society, both at the individual level for women who deserve a lot better, and for our culture at large, is astounding. It cannot be overstated how devastating this is for the United States and the Western world at large. And this is why I love Gina and Evie Magazine, because they always provide the receipts for this stuff. Gina writes, few are considering the negative impact this will have on our greater society. For example, the birth replacement rate, which we talk about all the time on the show, is already trending below replacement. And surveys show that women who are unmarried and childless tend to struggle more with mental illness and feelings of self-confidence. Don't take Evie Magazine's word for that, by the way. A study published in the Journal of European Psychiatry and later by Cambridge University, one of the top, if not the top university in world history, found in 2020 that women who are unmarried and childless have dramatic negative psychological effects that married women with children simply don't have. It is a shocking reality, yielding more anxiety, depression, suicidation, and more. I love how Gina poses this because it's great. Single childless women may be buying more things at the mall and traveling to various American cities, but at what cost in the long run? The bedrock of any healthy society is the family. And it's sad to think that we will see fewer and fewer families in the future, which of course means fewer children and happily married couples. Meanwhile, young women in their prime working years devote themselves to a career and a boss who doesn't truly care about them, have any promiscuous sex that has a negative impact on their mental health, and miss out on the true lifelong fulfillment that comes from being a wife and a mother. So, guys reading this, how do you feel about this? Is this what you're seeing in your dating lives? Are you seeing women who have zero desire to date for the purpose of marriage? They don't want to get married. They don't want to have kids. And on the flip side, women who are watching the stream right now, sound off in our chat. Do you feel like you empathize with this? Are you afraid of marriage and kids because of what our culture is telling you? Are you frustrated that this has become the status quo and the norm in culture? I'm dying to know. So chat, please sound off because we have to know what the people have to say about this. Amy says, my sister swore off men and dating because she was abused by her ex-husband. Oh, I know a lot of women in the same headspace. Totally separate conversation. We'll talk about it ends with us later this week, but I'm seeing so much being talked about with domestic violence right now for really good reasons. And I'm very, very hopeful that more women have the opportunity to escape those situations, but it just breaks my heart that that is so normal, that so many women think that's going to be every single experience that they ever have in their love lives. Milton says this is such an empty existence to promote for childless and unmarried women. When you have no one to go home to at the end of the day after your 100-hour-a-week job for your woke CEO, what even is the purpose of your life? I mean, at that point, you're literally just a wage slave. You are participating in exactly what the left claims they don't want. This like late stage end capitalism. And yet they are the ones promoting it, which is very difficult to try to wrap your head around. I'm so curious what you guys think about this, so keep sounding off. Nitty Witty says they like to promote childless women and pregnant men. They are trying to get people to switch genders. The overwhelming amount of money, resources, media, propaganda, everything that's going into society to get you to believe men can get pregnant and have children, but women should never want to. Doesn't that bother you? We thought we would have flying cars by now. Like, just think about that for a second. Erica says, I want to get married and have kids. It's just really hard to meet guys nowadays. Ooh, that's fascinating. And Erica wants to know, do we think maternity leave will go away now that employers can say, well, you made the choice to keep your baby? That's fascinating. I never would have considered that in the past, but probably to some degree. This is fascinating. Nicholas says, being single and unmarried is not wrong. It's not mental illness. It is perfectly fine. Even St. Paul in the Bible talked about how it was fine. Yeah, I said that at the beginning of this conversation, and maybe people came in and out at different times. In no way, shape, or form do I think you being single or childless as a woman between the age 25 and 44 is somehow evil or wrong or demonic. A lot of people are saying that in the media space, which is ridiculous, and I think should go without saying that we would never say something that ridiculous on the show. But I do think it's profoundly devastating, the impact that this has on society and culture when we convince people who otherwise would want to get married and have children that it is the worst possible thing that could ever happen to them. You should never even want that in the future. Never plan for it to be a part of your life or seek it out or do what you can to make that a part of your story. That's wrong. That's sad. And it's exactly the result of our society, which has neglected morality, neglected truth, and neglected the family for so many years that we just want to invalidate its existence entirely, which is crazy. Brando says men are afraid of getting married because the divorce court favors women over men. That's an interesting thought, and we've talked a lot about the red pill community and how all of that seems to be playing into some of this over the past couple of months. But I really think that the attack on marriage and the attack on the family is coming from all sides societally right now. You're seeing it from left-wing feminism with astounding rates because you're trying to convince women that they are empowered and punk rock and girl bossy if they reject the idea of getting married, having children, and instead put their career first, foremost, and only in their lives. But you're also watching men who claim to be wildly conservative, but I don't actually think it's a conservative worldview or objective point to take, that men should never get married because a woman is just going to steal everything from you and ruin your life, and the only way to be a real man is to sleep with as many people as possible and never settle down and never commit to anyone. That's also wrong for the exact same reasons, just on the flip side of the coin. And I just think we're starting to see the snowball down the hill effect of what happens when marriage is not normal in society and when family is not normal in society. You can be unmarried and without a family and be a wonderful human being, be contributing positively to society, be a good person. But when we make that the norm, we see the fabric of our society begin to fray very, very quickly. Interestingly, on the fertility rate side of things, which we've talked about a lot this year in the United States, in Canada, in the UK, in Europe, in South Korea, in Japan, many countries are now trying to come up with really innovative solutions to get people to have kids. So while America is just trending further in the anti-marriage, anti-family direction, other countries are trying to come up with solutions to make marriage and family normal again. Hungary has been a huge pilot program nation on this, providing tax credits, grants, and incentives for people to get married and to have children. And South Korea made news just a couple of weeks ago after one of their provinces is offering $38,000 to young couples who are going to get married, which is fascinating to think about, specifically trying to replace their decaying fertility rate and replace their existing population. I honestly think that's not such a bad idea. And you're seeing both of the presidential candidates in the United States presidential race start to toy with this idea of child tax credits or some sort of financial incentive to do this. But the truth is, if they want the United States to continue existing at all, at the bare minimum, we need to replace our current population. And typically throughout history, the way to do that is to get married and have a bunch of children, which sounds horrible, right? Based on what everyone's telling you. But I don't know. I think it sounds pretty fun to tell people, make more babies. What a joyful way to live your life. Take it from the married chick, everybody. Make more babies and the world will be a better place. Last thing I want to jump into on the show today is a big one, and it's going to take quite a bit of time, so feel free to jump in and out if you guys have to. But tons of you have been asking for my reaction on RFK dropping out of the presidential race, and specifically the speech that he gave during his endorsement of Donald Trump's candidacy, where he touched on healthcare policy, big food, big pharma, and why the United States is slowly poisoning its own children, which is fascinating. For those that may just have started following me recently or just joining our community recently, you may or may not know that I was actually pre-med in college. My undergraduate degree is in biomedical sciences. And then I did my graduate program, a master's degree at Georgetown University in a very long name, so bear with me, biomedical sciences, policy, and advocacy. Basically, like healthcare policy meets public health law meets the medical school. It was a fascinating program. And I actually was in that program as COVID was emerging. So it was so interesting to learn about the World Health Organization, the WHO, the CDC, the NIH, Anthony Fauci, why we were suddenly just ignoring every single healthcare guideline about vaccine rollouts, interesting to think about, or social distancing, interesting to think about, or international public health law, because we literally reinvented the wheel with COVID. I could tell a million stories from that chapter of my life, but all in all, it was a fascinating experiment living in Washington, D.C., learning from, in all of my classes, the top scientists at the FDA, at the CDC, at the WHO. And I thought that's really where I wanted to take my career, was into healthcare policy. God obviously had other plans, hence here we are. But it was so frustrating being in this program, and irrespective of political background, every single one of my classmates and myself asking over and over and over again, how is that allowed? How is that possible? How are there not more regulations about this stuff, particularly with the government being directly in bed with Big Pharma and the revolving door of Big Pharma executives and top people in the government switching jobs like every 6 months. It's the government who gets to determine which drugs are even allowed to come to the market. It's the government who largely determines which companies get which patents, get which opportunities for vaccine development, pharmaceuticals, etc. And it is massively regulating in a bad way with the worst red tape imaginable, like honestly worse than the military-industrial complex, the healthcare industry for Americans. If you think that we have a free market for healthcare, I can't, that's like a PhD level conversation for us to have another time. But I've been following the presidential race as we get closer to November with greater intensity. I think most people have. And what I've really appreciated over the past year or so from RFK Jr. and his independent bid for president has been his diligent focus on these exact problems, on Big Pharma, on big food, on why the government is so in bed with the medical industry, and why we are literally, deliberately making ourselves sick in the United States. He talked about this at length in his suspension of his campaign speech just the other day, and he said so many good things that I knew I would be a horrible person if I didn't share this with you guys, just in case on the off chance you didn't get a chance to see this. So, without further ado, let's listen to the man himself, RFK Jr., who we are very much praying for as his Secret Service detail was taken away today. So please keep him in your prayers. Talk about these very issues. I don't think there is a person alive in America today who has the courage, the guts, and the bravery to say all of this out loud in the American political zeitgeist as a presidential candidate and vow to do something about it.
In case some of you don't realize how dire the condition is of our children's health and chronic disease in general, I would urge you to view Dr. Carlson's recent interview with Kelly Means and his sister, Dr. Casey Means, who is the top graduate of her class at Stanford Medical School.
Total side note, absolutely agree. We're going to be doing a different reaction to that Tucker Carlson and Dr. Casey Means video. Fascinating interview, but she is an incredible resource if you're looking for more people to learn about this subject from.
This is an issue that affects all of us far more directly and urgently than any culture war issue and all the other issues that we obsess on and that are tearing apart our country. This is the most important issue. Therefore, it has the potential to bring us together. So let me share a little bit about why I believe it's so urgent.
Can I also just say, this unity ticket idea, I am so joyful about. Trump is also doing a rally today in Detroit with Tulsi Gabbard. I haven't watched any of it because I've been busy working. But I love that people from every single point along the political spectrum are saying, F this. We're so sick and tired of the two-party system. We're so sick and tired of how this is being operated behind our backs, how it's being rigged behind our backs. Let's be honest. I'm tired of this. We need to unify as a country. A house divided cannot stand. The fact that we got that picture of RFK shaking hands with Donald Trump at the rally hosted by Turning Point Action this last weekend, and RFK said himself, it's time for us to love our children more than we hate each other. Chills. Like, if you are a political nerd of any kind, the last week has been so fascinating to explore.
Today, 2/3, we spend more on healthcare than any country on earth, twice what they pay in Europe. And yet we have the worst health outcomes of any nation in the world. We're about 79th in health outcomes behind Costa Rica and Nicaragua and Mongolia and other countries. Nobody has a chronic disease burden like we have. And during the COVID epidemic, we had the highest body count of any country in the world. We had 16% of the COVID deaths, and we only have 4.2% of the world's population. But
get your booster, people. but get your booster.
And CDC says that's because we are the sickest people on earth. We have the highest chronic disease rate on earth. And the average American who died from COVID had 3.8 chronic diseases. So these were people who had immune system collapse, who had mitochondrial dysfunction. And no other country has anything like this. 2/3 of American adults and children suffer from chronic health issues.
Did you hear that? 2/3 of American adults are suffering from chronic health issues. We're talking long-term autoimmune diseases. We're talking cancer. We're talking bone disease. This is not normal. A supermajority of Americans are suffering from chronic illness. No other country in the world can say the same. And if you think that's bad, listen to this.
50 years ago, that number was less than 1%. So we've gone from 1% to 66%. In America, 74% of Americans are now overweight or obese, and 50% of our children. 120 years ago, when somebody was obese, they were sent to the circus. There were case reports done about them. Obesity was almost unknown. In Japan, the childhood obesity rate is 3% compared to 50% here. Half of Americans have prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. When my uncle was president, I was a boy. Juvenile diabetes was effectively non-existent. A typical pediatrician would see one case of diabetes during his entire career, a 40 or 50-year career. Today, 1 out of every 3 kids who walks through his office door is diabetic or pre-diabetic. And
as a scientist by education, that is baffling to me. How 50% of American kids are overweight or obese, which, like it or not, fact checkers, is inherently tied into every health issue known to man. All of those chronic illnesses directly linked to obesity. And 1/3 of all children will walk through a pediatrician's office with diabetes. How is that even possible? That this has happened so quickly in just a few decades, not centuries, but a few decades in the United States of America. Nobody wants to ask the preventative questions. Nobody wants to say, something's causing this, so maybe we should fix that instead of just putting a Band-Aid on it in the healthcare system, or I don't know, selling them a pharmaceutical. But wait, who owns the pharmaceutical companies and the food companies? The same people,
mitochondrial disorder that caused diabetes, also causing Alzheimer's, which is now classified as diabetes. And it's costing this country more than our military budget every year. There's been an explosion of neurological illnesses that I never saw as a kid: ADD, ADHD, speech delay, language delay, Tourette's syndrome, narcolepsy, ASD, Asperger's, autism. In the year 2000, the autism rate was 1 in 1,500. Now, autism rates in kids are 1 in 36, according to CDC nationally. Nobody's talking about this. 1 in every 22 kids in California has autism. And this is a crisis that 77% of our kids are too disabled to serve in the United States military. What is happening to our country?
What is happening to our country? I don't know. I'm no conspiracy theorist. But maybe there's something strategic about having 1 in 36 kids have an autism diagnosis, about having 50% of children, 1 in 2, be overweight or morbidly obese, about having 70+% of the rate of children in America eventually be so sick that they will be ineligible, unable, disqualified from serving in the armed forces. This is a deliberate, intentional, slow-release poisoning of our society. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. And the fact that no one is asking why, I'll tell you why, because they're all in on it. All the powers that be, all the people pulling the purse strings, they're all in on it, is insane. I think, honestly, pre-COVID, nobody really cared about healthcare policy. Nobody cared. There were, like, differences of opinion on Obamacare, but nobody even really knew what Obamacare was, let's be totally honest. Everybody was confused about that. Nobody cared. And for the last several decades, as chemicals and toxins have been introduced into the food system, as certain pharmaceutical protocols have changed, as our healthcare policy has changed, nobody's paid attention because nobody cared. And I think the powers that be were relying on the fact that nobody cared because nobody would ask questions.
And why isn't this in the headlines every single day? There's nobody else in the world that is experiencing this. This is only happening in America. About 18%, and by the way, you know, there has been no change in diagnosis, which the industry sometimes like to say. There has been no change in screening. This is a change in incidence. In my generation, 70-year-old men, the autism rates are about 1 in 10,000. In my kids' generation, 1 in 34. I'll repeat, in California, 1 in 22. Why are we letting this happen? Why are we allowing this to happen to our children?
He calls this a war on America's children. And I think that's a very poignant, profound identification of what's really going on here. A war on America's children. Because it doesn't necessarily look like armed conflict. But if you can quite literally, in every literal definition of the word, disable an entire generation, you don't need armed conflict. They'll have to rely on you for the rest of their life for life-sustaining treatment. This is insane.
These are the most precious assets that we have in this country. How can we let this happen to them? About 18% of American teens now have fatty liver disease. That's like 1 out of every 5. That disease, when I was a kid, only affected late-stage alcoholics who were elderly. Cancer rates are skyrocketing in the young and the old. Young adult cancers are up 79%. 1 in 4 American women is on antidepressant medication. 40% of teens have a mental health diagnosis. And 15% of high schoolers are on Adderall, and 500,000 children on SSRIs. So what's causing this suffering? I'll name 2 culprits. First, and the worst, is ultra-processed food.
Yes, RFK. Ultra-processed food. This man has captured my heart. Who is saying that? Name me one other politician that's remotely saying any of this. A, they don't know, or B, they don't care because they're in on it. They're directly profiting from it. Ultra-processed food. Protect this man at all costs. The fact that he's the only one saying it.
About 70% of American children's diet is ultra-processed. That means industrial manufactured in a factory. These foods consist primarily of processed sugar, ultra-processed grains, and seed oils.
The fact that he said seed oils. RFK, I love you, okay? I've loved every single thing you've said about healthcare for your entire campaign. Do not give up on the war on seed oils, okay? I just had to educate my mom and dad walking through the aisles of Costco yesterday when they picked me up from the airport. Yeah, you might think this snack is healthy. It's not healthy. Don't put it in the cart. And then I had to explain what seed oils even were to my mom. That was a whole long conversation. If you don't know about this entire hidden field of research, hidden on purpose, please, for the love of all that is good for your homework, please do like the bare minimum research on what seed oils are today, okay? That's your homework.
Laboratory scientists who many of them formerly worked for the cigarette industry, which purchased all the big food companies in the 1970s and 80s, deployed thousands of scientists to figure out chemicals, new chemicals, to make the food more addictive. And these ingredients didn't exist 100 years ago. Humans aren't biologically adapted to eat them. Hundreds of these chemicals are now banned in Europe, but ubiquitous in American processed foods. The second culprit is toxic chemicals in our food, our medicine, in our environment. Pesticides, food additives, pharmaceutical drugs, and toxic waste permeate every cell of our bodies.
The microplastics.
The assault on our children's cells and hormones is unrelenting. To name just one problem, many of these chemicals increase estrogen because young children are ingesting so many of these hormone disruptors. America's puberty rate is now occurring at age 10 to 13, which is 6 years earlier than girls were reaching puberty in 1900. Our country has the earliest puberty rates of any continent on the earth. And no, this isn't because of better nutrition. This is not normal. Breast cancer is also estrogen-driven, and it now strikes 1 in 8 women. We are mass poisoning all of our children and our adults. Considering the grievous human cost of this tragic epidemic of chronic disease, it seems almost crass to mention the damage it does to our economy. But I'll say, it is crippling the nation's finances. When my uncle was president, our country spent $0 on chronic disease. Today, government health care spending is almost all for chronic disease. And it's double the military budget. And it is the fastest growing budget item in the federal budget. And chronic disease costs more to the economy as a whole, costs at least $4 trillion, 5 times our military budget. And that's a 20% drag on everything we do and everything we aspire to. Poor and minority communities suffer disproportionately. People who worry about DEI or about bigotry of any kind, this dwarfs anything. We are poisoning the poor. We are systematically poisoning minorities across this country. Industry lobbyists have made sure that most of the food stamp lunch program, about 70% of food stamps and about 70 or 77% of school lunches are processed foods. There's no vegetables. There's nothing that you would want to eat. We are just poisoning the poor citizens, and that's why they have the highest chronic disease burden of anybody, any demographic in our country, and the highest in the world. The same food industry lobbied to make sure that nearly all agricultural subsidies go to commodity crops that are the feedstock of processed food industry.
In case you need that in plainer English, in order to receive subsidies from the government in agriculture, which is quite common if you don't know much about ag policy, the companies that are getting the subsidies are the ones creating the processed food by the government. The same government who's directly responsible for deciding which companies on the pharmaceutical side get approval for the drugs. And it's all in the same administration, by the way, the FDA. It's all the same people deciding which food products get approved for human consumption and which drugs get approved for human consumption. If you don't think the two are inextricably related, think again. Think again. So he promises to do something about it, which I think is wildly powerful and honestly has never been more important than right now.
These policies are destroying small farms and they're destroying our soils. We give about, I think, 8 times as much in subsidies to tobacco than we do to fruits and vegetables. It makes no sense. If we want a healthy country, the good news is that we can change all this. We can change it very, very quickly. America can get healthy again. To do that, we need to do 3 things. First, we need to root out the corruption in our health agencies.
Get rid of the agencies, gut them, fire everybody, or at the very least, I don't know, make it a law that the big pharma executives and the big food executives can't come work at the government 2 weeks later. The military-industrial complex has those rules, but not healthcare, not big food, not big healthcare.
Second, we need to change incentives in our healthcare system. And third, we need to inspire Americans to get healthy again. 80% of NIH grants go to people who have conflicts of interest. These are the people, virtually everybody who sits, Joe Biden just appointed a new panel to NIH to decide the food recommendations. And they're all people who are from the industry. They're all people who are from the processed food companies. They're deciding what Americans, here is healthy, and the recommendations on the food pyramid, and what goes to our school lunch programs, what go to the program, the Swiss program, the food stamp programs. They're all corrupted and conflicted individuals. These agencies, the FDA, USDA, and CDC, all of them are controlled by giant for-profit corporations.
Am I the only one who's kind of genuinely worried for this man's safety? They just took away his Secret Service protection today, naturally, because he suspended his campaign. But he's calling out a lot of powerful people. Some of the most powerful people on earth. I admire his courage, but, please pray for this man, please.
75% of the FDA's funding doesn't come from taxpayer, it comes from pharma. And pharma executives and consultants and lobbyists cycle in and out of these agencies with President Trump's backing. I'm going to change that. We're going to staff these agencies with honest scientists and doctors who are free from industry funding. We're going to make sure the decisions of consumers, doctors, and patients are informed by unbiased science. A sick child is the best thing for the pharmaceutical industry. When American children or adults get sick with a chronic condition, they're put on medication for their entire life. Imagine what will happen when Medicare starts paying for Ozempic, which costs $1,500 a month, and it's being recommended for children as young as 6, all for a condition, obesity, that is completely preventable and barely even existed 100 years ago. And 74% of Americans are obese. The cost, if all of them took their Ozempic prescription, is $3 trillion a year. This is a drug that is made by Novo Nordisk, the biggest company in Europe. It's a Danish company, and the Danish government does not recommend it. It recommends change in diet to treat obesity and exercise. And in our country, the recommendation now is for Ozempic to children at age 6. Novo Nordisk, the biggest company in Europe, and virtually its entire value is based upon its projections of what it's going to sell, of the Ozempic it's going to sell to America. And we have the food lobbyists have a bill in front of Congress today that is backed by the White House, backed by Vice President Harris and President Biden to allow this to happen. This $3 trillion cost that is going to bankrupt our country.
What a powerful illustration of how this cycle works, right? They create a problem by manipulating something up front. So let's start with manipulating food. And you guys are asking in the chat for a zillion more guests on this topic. Ask and you shall receive, okay? You've been heard. We will work on this. You manipulate the food up front. Seed oils, perhaps. Create false food that doesn't exist, that's riddled with toxins and causes mass inflammation in your body to create a problem, let's say obesity. Obesity is normalized culturally through all kinds of propaganda on social media, in the mainstream media, the food pyramid, inventing new benchmarks for obesity. Did you know, by the way, that the CDC just changed their benchmarks in the last few months for what constitutes childhood obesity? to make it harder to be called obese because everybody was fat. There's nothing abnormal about that anymore. So if everything is normal about that, then it's just a problem that then you have to figure out how to live with. Not solve, but live with forever and ever and ever as a chronic disease that you will likely be prescribed pharmaceuticals for that are wildly expensive for short-term use, like Ozempic, a drug to create a problem that is entirely preventable that costs $1,500 per month, that we are now suggesting kids as young as 6 start taking to cure their obesity. But that won't really cure anything because obesity also happens to be linked to cancer and bone disease and brain disease and strokes and blood clots and anything else under the sun. So then they can sell you more pharmaceuticals for the rest of your life and keep manipulating the food industry because they all work for the same companies and they all are BFFs with the same people in government to rinse and repeat the cycle. None of these problems existed 100 years ago. Does that not make you, like, want to punch someone in the face? I mean, I don't even know how else to describe the anger I feel over that. If you are not motivated as hell to vote in this election on any issue other than this one, let it be this one. He's going to close us out.
For a fraction of that amount, we could buy organic food for every American family, 3 meals a day, and eliminate diabetes altogether. We're going to bring healthy food back to school lunches. We're going to stop subsidizing the worst foods with our agricultural subsidies. We're going to get toxic chemicals out of our food. We're going to reform the entire food system. And for that, we need new leadership in Washington. Because unfortunately, both the Democrats and the Republican parties are in cahoots with the big food producers, Big Pharma and Big Ag, which are among the DNC's major donors. If I'm given the chance to fix the chronic disease crisis and reform our food production, I promise that within 2 years, we will watch chronic disease burden lift dramatically. We will make Americans healthy again. Within 4 years, America will be a healthy country. We will be stronger, more resilient, more optimistic, and happier. I won't fail in doing this. Ultimately, the future, however it happens, is in God's hands and in the hands of the American voters and those of President Trump. If President Trump is elected and honors his word, the vast burden of chronic disease that now demoralizes and bankrupts the country will
disappear. We will make America healthy again. I didn't even get to show you like 80% of that speech because this was like a 50-minute speech. So you can look it up on C-SPAN to watch the entire thing. There's clips all over social media, or you can go back and try to find it on TV websites or whatever. But fascinating. So this was when he suspended his campaign. He then talked about a lot of these issues again at the Donald Trump rally hosted by Turning Point Action in the Phoenix area over the weekend. Highly encourage you to watch that speech as well. But the truth is, all of these things that we talk about on a day-by-day basis in our content somewhat are political, and I love politics. I've campaigned for different presidents. I worked at the White House and the U.S. Senate. I was on the cover of Newsweek magazine for the last presidential election cycle. I love politics. But all of these things that we talk about every day really aren't inherently political, or they shouldn't be. They have become so because of how unbelievably corrupt and demoralizing our federal government on both sides of the political aisle, I might add, have become over the last several years. So sadly, they have become somewhat political. Perhaps the best way I can say this is they're not partisan. And I think it takes very bare minimum shallow research to realize the people who have been in Washington over and over and over and over and over again for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years are the people who are scheming to create these problems that they will then sell you the antidote to over and over again. The question is, are we going to accept that? Are we going to accept that it sucks that women can't speak aloud in other parts of the world, but we don't really care about human rights anymore because it's just not in our country, so we just don't really care? Are we going to accept that nearly half of women in our country are going to be single and childless by the year 2030? because it's going to help all of the corporate CEOs. Are we going to accept that 50% of children in this country are obese? That 72+% of young people today will be ineligible to serve in our military because of chronic health issues? That 66% of American adults do have a chronic disease already? Are we going to accept that because that's just the way it is? Or are we going to courageously do something about it, say something about it, change everything about it? I hope that these streams and all of our content inspires you to stand up and fight in whatever way you can. Even something as little as retweeting something or reposting something on your Instagram story, becoming a content creator yourself in whatever audience you have and trying to make more awareness about these issues. Or maybe something as simple as just showing up to vote in November for a candidate that actually cares about these issues. In case that wasn't obvious, Donald Trump has promised RFK that he can be in charge of all of the healthcare policy in this country, which is huge, like truly a godsend as someone who studied healthcare policy at length. I'm tired of waking up every day and rolling over and opening my phone and saying, ugh, again? I can't keep doing this, America. The news cycle is terrible. Maybe it's time for us to fight for a future that we make our own and we are proud to call home again. We are back for the stream tomorrow at our normal time. And tomorrow we're going to be talking about a bunch of very fun stuff, including that they canceled the Acolyte show. I know that was like a week ago, but everybody is having a meltdown about it on the internet, and true Star Wars fans are rejoicing. Plus, OpenAI, which is the parent company of ChatGPT and a few other AI ventures, is exploring the creation of not safe for work content. Huge debates happening about AI pornography and the ethics of what artificial intelligence is going to look like for the next generation, and more. If you guys are new around here, please, please, please don't forget to smash that follow or subscribe button on any of our platforms, and want to give a huge thank you from the bottom of my heart again for all of you who have helped us to cross our goal over the threshold into 1 million people in our Instagram community today. We'll do a huge post where you guys can introduce yourselves to each other and everything later this week, but I am beyond grateful, and I just never could have imagined, oh God, so emotional, something like this happening in such a short period of time in content creation. You guys are the greatest group of people I've ever had the chance of interacting with every day, and I'm so excited for what the future holds. Love you guys so very much. Happy Monday, and we will see you tomorrow.